There we go.
All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, we're back to Wheel of Time, overthinking it after we've done reading it. And we're talking today about the nature of the madness, real life stuff versus the literature stuff. And we've got lots of different directions we're going to go with that. Because this is one area that Jordan did do a little homework, although he did it with the information they had at the time. So those of you who may have a psychological background and go, "You're wrong." Remember, we're doing it in the context of a book that was written at a certain time. I got you covered with the things he missed. Don't worry. Uh, Before that, I do want to address one area where he actually didn't do his homework well enough. Uh, because we praise him all the time. Let's go
Mhm.
ahead and put one in the potty for him here. Language. You can't study cognition without studying language because that's how we communicate it with each other. And I was just thinking about it when I was looking over literature for this stuff, language came up a lot in the basis of it and how it works. And uh, we're talking after the breaking of the world, about a 3,000 year span. There should have been a lot more variance in language. Now, I understand for ease of writing a novel, you're going to need a common language for everybody unless you're going to write it completely different. But realistically, 1,000 years, the Shanshan being gone is not going to be a different accent.
Even the eel.
Yeah, it's going to be a
Yeah,
completely different language. Look at the European languages. They're right there next to each other, and they still look how English branched off, Old English branched off
yeah.
Germanic languages. It's
Well,
yeah.
why don't the eel speak Italian? Because Italian is basically a outgrowth of Latin,
Hmm.
and so that's more logically what the eel would speak because they were isolated for so long without any outside influences. So you would expect they would speak some variation of the old tongue still.
Hmm. Yeah, so all we got in that one continent was dialects of
Hmm.
a common language. And you can kind of get away with that all on the main continent. But like you said, the Sharans should have a completely different language.
Yeah,
The Aiel should have a
yeah.
completely different language. And again, 1,000 years is enough time for the Shanshan to have a completely different language.
Yeah, yeah, and I to your point, that's got to just be yeah, this doesn't make sense, but I can't do it logically because then it just creates a lot of problems.
Hmm.
Like, I've brought up one of my favorite TV shows, SG1, Stargate SG1, and in the first season, that's why you have the archaeologist, anthropologist, Dr. Daniel Jackson on the team because he's also a student of ancient languages.
Hmm.
They very quickly just dumped that and never referenced it again, never said anything about it again. So he reads the old written languages, but everyone they encounter just speaks English because look, it's a TV show, dang it, and we can't have the audience not know what's going on.
I mean, yeah, because we have a different language from the beginning of the breaking to where we are in Randland, which is the old tongue.
Mm-hmm.
Where were we in that progress when Hawkwing's son left? Or,
Mm.
where were we in the process when the Aiel should be speaking the old tongue, right? Or a variant thereof. Like you said,
Yeah,
any of the romantic languages, Italian, French, whatever, Portuguese.
yeah.
So yeah, that was one of the things. I know it would have made the writing of the novel very, very difficult, but it is. I mean, we praise him for his realism, and this is where he got off the realism boat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. What else? Oh, we have a comment from
Oh yeah,
our
from last
last
time.
from last time, our social political episode on New Year's resolutions. So thank you for sharing yours with us, ISO. Um, I don't really even have one. It's just more of a get back on my routine of doing the things I need to do, physically and mentally. Uh,
Well, there is
which
a
it
secondary one for me based. They're kind of connected, but completely unrelated. Is the quitting drinking for a while, which we're on day 8. That's a long time in cat years when you're trying to get rid of an addiction. So holding strong. But the second half of that is the money I save from that, which I know exactly how much I spend on that kind of stuff, is actually going to go into a Fidelity account, a fund to grow and become cash money. So,
Hmm.
so we're going to start investing with the money we save from destroying our brain.
All right, well, ISO's New Year's resolutions are picking math back up, and that's something I have meant to do when the kids were doing it, and I never got around to it because it was too easy not to, because my wife still remembered all that stuff, so she just did it, and I helped them with all the not important stuff, haha, the humanities stuff. Anyway,
I don't
uh,
need math. I've got statistics.
picking math back up, aiming at being a quant, oh dear, and learning piano to play my favorite songs and relax. Let's see how it goes. Um, kudos to you. You're Russian, so I'm shocked you don't already play piano and or violin. Uh, what's wrong with you? I'm sure your parents are ashamed.
You're
Uh,
you're you're basing it on your bias of knowing the areas he talked about as the only areas we see, and he's
yeah,
in not one of those areas.
right. Anyway, so good luck with that. And as we said, don't make it easy. It shouldn't be easy, but come up with a plan to make it simple, and it'll be a lot easier to stick with it. And you're on day 8. Once you get to a certain point where it starts to become habit instead of addiction, then it becomes a lot easier, you know,
Theoretically,
theoretically. All right.
depending on how ingrained it was.
Well, one of the things before we get started on madness, um a bit of a addendum to last time, because I accidentally found um some stuff on Rand lighting his pipe that I didn't find last time. And I found it interesting, and kudos to us, I think, because um, I thought we had a pretty interesting take, and I didn't see it when I was scrolling around looking at stuff on what happened. But something I didn't find until I was getting ready for today is I accidentally found some more from that panel that Sanderson did with Harriet. I don't remember at which convention, and this came up. And apparently that is another one of the things that Jordan wrote and did not put in a note. So he didn't want you to know. And Sanderson has said that, and I didn't go down that rabbit hole because we're doing other stuff today. So I didn't see if he ever gave his own personal thoughts on what happened. But
Well, from our other critiques of what Sanderson did with Jordan material, I'm glad he didn't take it upon himself to try to explain it in the literature itself.
mhm, yeah, well, so he had his own personal theories from both as a reader, but also as someone who dug through the notes to get to do the writing. But at the time he was saying this, he said, I'm not going to share those yet because I want other people to think and talk about amongst themselves. Harriet also has her own theories, which she won't share, and it's because, as quoting her as closely as I can remember, because I forgot to leave this up, is Jim wanted there to be mystery. And so that's why she won't say anything about it, is that's the way he wanted it. And out of respect for that, that's the way she's going to keep it. But what she would say is that you're starting a new age. This was partly to just show that things are going to be not just different, but potentially very different, which might include, as she put it, different kinds of magic. So that leads to the speculation that however Rand did what he did, it's quite possible eventually other people are going to learn how to do it too. And so you may have in the fourth age, a different kind of magic, if you will, system in addition to the normal channeling. So I found that interesting as I was digging through stuff for today. All right. But what I wanted to talk about was madness, and that was partly because it was already on my mind. It was in my epilogue notes. Um, but also because of what we talked about last time with addiction and habits. I do think it's an interesting segue from from that into Wheel of Time. Um, Partly because of what you bring to the table with the technical side of it versus the colloquial side of it. And I think I've said this before when we were recording, is I have found on one of the sports radio guys I listen to has been very open about his own mental health struggles and processes. And he phrased it this way. And I thought, you know what, that's a very good layperson's explanation of um, depression and anxiety, which is the way he put it is, are you sad about something? Because that's normal. You know, your dog died. Yeah, you're going to be sad. That's not depression. That's You're sad because you're a human being and you have emotions. Do you have a presentation coming up and you're anxious about it? That's not anxiety. That's being a human. Yeah, you're anxious about something. You know, you have a job interview. Or do you just wake up and you're anxious? Do you just wake up and you're sad? That is a mental health thing. You know, that is depression, that is anxiety. And I thought that was a very good colloquial layperson's definition of what the difference is there. And we talk a lot and we use the term crazy a lot colloquially, sometimes in jest of, yo, bitches be crazy. Okay, but what does that mean technically,
Well,
right?
I think technically it's similar to our addiction conversation, where
Mm-hmm.
is a habit versus addiction, as I defined it, where it it becomes bad for your life. You know it becomes bad for your life, but you still do it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas depression, we'll use that as an example. Do you wake up depressed because depressed and the depression is so bad it keeps you from doing the things that make you not depressed, right? So is it actually a direct negative impact on your life? You know you need to get up and do something. Getting up and do something will be good for you,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't do it. There's no just pull yourself up and do it, because you have an inability to do it. That's real depression. Anxiety. I know if I get around people, I'll have a social life and I'll feel better. But if I have social anxiety and I know it can make me better and I want to do it, but when I try to do it, I feel like I'm going to die. That's real social anxiety, right? So it's pretty much the same as addiction, just different mechanisms, different outcomes, right? So it's
Yeah, I just had this thought that is, as much as I criticized Androl as a character showing up out of nowhere so late, there is he does serve a very interesting contrast with Rand, because because we get so many points of view from him, you see the effects of his taint madness and also how he copes with it, because he knows it's not real. The shadows aren't trying to get you, but that
he
doesn't make
also
it go
can't help but
away.
acknowledge them. Yeah.
Yeah. And he also sometimes can't help but be overwhelmed by them. Contrast that with how Rand deals with it, which is just suck it up, bro. Get hard, bro.
Well, we might go into the difference there though too, because Rand's madness was the voice in his head. Andrew's was a sensory deprivation of some kind.
Hmm.
And there's a difference between those two. Because Rand did treat that voice in his head like Andrew treated the shadows in the beginning, at least, until he realized this guy's actually giving me real information. But in the beginning, he's like, oh, there's a voice in my head. I'm hearing things. I'm crazy.
Mm-hmm. Not just a voice, but the voice of the greatest monster in our folklore, the Kinslayer. Oh, and I'm him. Great.
Yeah. So this it's funny because you brought that up and we went completely different routes in our thought process on
Mm-hmm.
it. And I immediately went to digging deeper into how to convey schizophrenia to the audience. And you went, what, PTSD and all kinds of other things like that. But they're not 100% uh, mutually exclusive, especially when we get to age onset of schizophrenia and things like that. So, uh,
Well, also because looking at the way Simirhaj explains the voices, I think it's entirely possible that Rand's weakened himself by being so self-flagellating, and that made him more susceptible to that. So then you combine that with the with all the various traumas he suffers, and it's no wonder that he ends up the way he ends up.
so maybe we start with onset of schizophrenia. Uh, Even though that was like three-quarters of the way down my page here, uh, it it's not typically a childhood disease, and it's not typically something that comes on in adulthood. It is a disease that typically comes on in adolescence to early adulthood, which is the same time we get a massive increase of growth in our prefrontal cortex, like a growth spurt of our prefrontal cortex, earlier in girls than in guys. And what do
Hmm.
we have with the power? They start channeling earlier for females and men later. And there are signs that can be kind of parsed out at a young age, but it's usually kicked in by a major stressor during that adolescence to young adulthood. What do we get in this story? We get Rand having the early signs of it, having the genetic predisposition to it. And then when he's about 18 years old, a woman comes into his village, pulls him out. They're chased by shadow spawn that they thought were just stories and blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden he's channeling. And the madness starts setting in as soon as you start channeling. And realistically, you want to talk about trauma in this world, just finding out you can channel
Hmm.
is trauma in and of itself. And most of the people in the Black Tower, Dammer Flynn aside, are are uh, are of that age, experiencing the end of the world, finding out they can channel, and boom, we've got this onset of these stressors that someone genetically predisposed to it are going to all of a sudden just kick into that illness. And it once it happens, it starts happening fast. So I think there's your PTSD connection right there. It's
Mm.
not necessarily PTSD, it's trauma when you already have the predisposition for it.
That makes sense. Also, it well, let's get back to your notes and where you're going, because I'm curious to go down this technical rabbit hole because I have I think I've brought these numbers up once when we were talking about things that, get you canceled and banned on social media um of the various um mental illnesses. From the numbers I've heard and seen, paranoid schizophrenics have the highest suicide risk by far.
Yeah, we're gonna get there.
Okay.
And I directly tied that one to Rand too. So, but let's go ahead and start with just defining it. As we talked about just recently, a few minutes ago, with anxiety and depression, it's hard to define because, loosely defined, schizophrenia is a disease of thinking differently than everybody else.
So Einstein was a schizophrenic?
Yeah, well, maybe he was. We'll get to that too.
Maybe
But
it's like psychopathy.
maybe
Hmm.
we'll see. There's an argument for that, and that argument was going on when Jordan was writing these
Hmm.
things. But uh, like I said, I think he did some homework in this. But the problem is he did homework in a time where a lot of things got flipped on their head after about the time he died. So it's it's kind of here or there. So I'm speaking to what it was perceived as at the time he was writing. So again, any modern psychs out there go, "Oh, you're wrong on this." Bear with me here. But it is basically a disease based on cognitive abnormalities, which defining cognitive abnormalities, we're looking at mostly the prefrontal cortex, your consciousness, what you consciously the perception that your frontal cortex puts on the world versus what's actually there. So loose associations, abnormalities in sequential thought, all of those things. So it manifests a lot because they have a trouble with the kind of having the correct level of abstraction, which I kind of put a note for myself and I didn't get to get too deep into this. Now I'm curious, so I might. But would we see more abnormalities in the left brain if this is the case? Because the left brain is the making a heuristic of the world versus the right brain is the inputs, taking things as they are. Uh, they struggle because a lot of times they have a literal interpretation of everything. You can do association tests like Sapolsky uses the example of banana, peach, apple. What do these have in common? And they'll say, oh, they have closed loop letters in them or something instead of saying they're all fruits,
Hmm.
So this sounds like super autistic when you really see it up front, except when you get to things like sayings. Again, going by the Sapolsky lectures, Stanford has free lectures online, by the way. You can watch them. He talks about remember during World War II, they would caution people writing letters to the sailors to not give away too much information.
Mm.
And the saying they used was loose lips sink ships. So we know that as don't blab your loved one's current locations so the
Hmm.
U-boats can come and kill them, right? A schizophrenic would have in their mind an ocean full of giant lips coming up and swallowing ships. So now you can see how the literal interpretation, which sounds just really autistic, actually is worse and can play towards what we call when we get down the rabbit hole of delusions and hearing voices and all of these things, which is usually how it manifests: delusions and paranoia. Paranoia first, even though I said it second. When things make little sense around you, things get scary, and
Hmm.
fear breeds paranoia. So,
Why is one of the most basic, if not the most basic,
mhm.
fear of the dark,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, think about being out in
Jaws
the
works
middle,
because we
yeah,
never see the shark.
out in the middle of the ocean at night. You're going to every little difference in temperature of ocean current that touches your leg and wave that slaps your ear and everything is going to manifest in the worst possible thing it can. So
Hmm.
we all have the capacity to think this way. Just being in a dark room and you hear a noise, you have all kinds of thoughts that the noise could be. And the one that's probably just, your coat rack fell over or something is probably the correct one. But
My son's father-in-law was a rescue diver in the Navy,
mhm.
and he was talking about the fun training exercises they got to do as the rescue divers, which was fun, which was all right, who gets to be the dummy? And you just get dumped in the ocean and you have to wait there while the rest of the crew finds you and rescues you. And they would debate which is worse, being in murky water where you can't see what's around you, or I think he said the Adriatic is an especially clear body of water. And he said he thought that made it worse because during the daytime, there the the sun shining through the water creates all kinds of distortions and shadows. So you think there's all kinds of stuff around you,
Mhm.
and there probably isn't, but you think there is,
Yeah.
and you're not sure because of the shadows.
Yeah. So keep that in mind as we go further because it does seem to us people who kind of mostly think normally, normal in air quotes, normal depends on culture too. But uh the how does that manifest in unreal hallucinations? Well, we just saw with our unknown factor, our scary delusions. We just saw with a literal interpretation of something, creating an imagination that
Mm-hmm.
can't exist, but they hear the words, so it's what they think. Uh, how can that result in hallucinations and voices in your head when they're not there, right? And voices is the most common. So people say, "Oh, the voices in your head." That's kind of true. The problem is we're all getting random inputs from the surroundings, be it sounds, be it everything. And what happens to people who have this condition is random sound waves that are coming in end up structuring themselves into a literally perceived stimulus. So when you look at somebody, when you ask them, hey, when a sentence comes to mind, write it, and they write it, they're that literal. How can that result in being crazy other than just being annoying? That's exactly how it happens. All these random sound waves are coming in, and your brain is trying to structure them into things, and it ends up structuring it into what you literally believe, which is the second part. When you look at the manifestations of it, belief systems structure the noises and the hallucinations. So I already have a belief system. I'm Catholic. That's why I have the Exorcist handbook up there. I'm Catholic. I have sleep paralysis and I'm hearing noises and I see shadows moving in the night. Demons. I saw a demon. The demon has possessed me. That's why I couldn't move. So all of those things combined, the craziness of things making no sense, the randomness coming together into a structure based on your belief system, and there you go. Now, honorable mention, and I didn't get time to really look into this. We all have something in, most of us have something in our head. There is a study where some people do not have inner voice, but we all have inner voice. Most of us have inner voice, default mode network. That's the voice that when you lay down in bed says, huh, what am I going to do about lunch tomorrow? Because I could go out with this person, but I kind of wanted to stay home. And then you end up for 30 minutes because you're thinking about lunch. But if you can imagine yourself in a situation, you're actually hearing a voice in your head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, someone who thinks literally and has trouble with abstraction will hear a voice instead of saying, oh, that's me talking to myself. Right. So now we're going down the Rand rabbit hole here. His inner voice is talking to himself and
And it
he's
is his
attaching
voice because
it
it's his
is
former life, his former,
it is
you know.
his voice, and now we add the metaphysic of the Rand land, right, where there is this thing called the soul, and there's not a big leap in belief systems to say soul and consciousness, or not consciousness, conscience are the same thing, right? So put all those things together and we can kind of explore how I think Jordan did a little homework and modeled his system of crazy off of what was believed about or what was known about schizas at the time. Now, those are all things that still hold true. Uh, oh, and again, honorable mention, having this kind of mind in most societies ends up creating isolation and ostracization. Ostraciz, the hardest word in English language to pronounce other than Worcestershire. Ostracization exacerbate the illness because now you're alone in your own thoughts and you're alone with the random sounds and you're not interacting with people getting that positive serotonin boost, which when we get to the chemicals later is important of actually, you know, being a social being. Add all that up and you get pretty crazy.
Some of the links and theories and discussions I found talking about, because one of the things that brought this up is I was curious how much Rand's channeling sickness. Now the trigger is very clearly when the balefire streams crossed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but why is it getting worse and then why does it suddenly go away was the thought I had, the question I wanted answered. And does his madness, does his mental state have something to do with that? Because you see his mental state clearly deteriorating through the series.
Mm-hmm.
And so the channeling sickness is also getting worse. So to me, it seemed a causal link there, or there is a causal link there. So it seemed to me there's something deeper there as well. And part of that mental deterioration is his increasing personal isolation, which seems weird because he's never alone. I mean,
Okay,
he's the
so
freaking emperor of the continent. He's never
yeah,
alone, but he is increasingly isolated mentally.
and this is where we have to abstract from real life crazy versus Randland metaphysic
Mm-hmm.
souls crazy, because if we apply the things I just talked about to this idea of threads in the pattern and your soul and the binding forces there, and balefire being this really powerful magic, not magic, metaphysic, because Jordan hated the word magic, uh, this powerful metaphysic that can really affect these things. I wonder if the sickness was trying to think of the right word. Basically, Rand had his own voice in his head, which was his own voice, his own soul. And because now they were combined, it created a dissonance
Mm-hmm.
in the system for both of them. It created a dissonance in the system. So there was something off based on the fact that he had basically combined his thread with Moradin's to some degree. And so now it's not just his soul playing into it, it's a fight between all of these things, which would create physical sickness. Now, coming back out of it, one of the things he did before the apples up on the mountain was he accepted the voice in his head as himself. You can't just do it as a schizophrenic in real life. You can't just say, "Oh, that those random sounds or that bubbling up of conscience is not a separate voice." They can't because the brain can't work that way. But in Randland, it wasn't. He accepted it. That is me. That's me. I'm not crazy because I am. I'm not crazy because this soul that was once Lews Therin and is now Randolph Thor exists. And so I don't know why that would stop the connection thread. I don't think it did, or else we wouldn't have had the
Mm-hmm.
end result where they changed bodies
Yeah.
at the end. But it might have alleviated the symptoms, having gotten rid of one part of the issue. That would be my best guess.
That is, well, let's see. Let's bring up, let me think. Where do I want to start here with the Wheel of Timeness? Let me bring up this Reddit thread because I thought this was a good, um, where are you? That one. I thought this was a good synopsis of a number of threads and theories that I came across, and um, and it also includes a um, an interview quote that I found when I was going through things uh, from Jordan, and all right, so this is from the Watt Reddit, and it's about the channeling sickness. Um, and this is from just 3 years ago, so this is well after all the books have been published and people have been talking about it, and there's still not a good answer. And as this guy starts out saying, yeah, I agree. I don't think there's a simple or straight answer for this question. Like you, when I finished the series, I went on a quest to find out why the hell Rand kept getting so sick when he channeled. The first answer I heard was that it was caused by Rand and Morden connecting themselves when their balefire streams crossed. As a result, whenever either of them channeled the one power, they would both feel a horrendous nausea that only got worse as time went on. This answer makes sense and coincides roughly when Rand starts to get sick. However, I heard from a few people on here that this wasn't the case and had actually been denied by the author to some extent. I'm sorry, I don't have a source for you, so I can't prove anything. But it also encounters the problem that Rand and Morden are still connected after Dragonmount, and Rand doesn't appear to get sick during Towers of Midnight or Memory of Light, which is, as an aside from myself, yeah, that was my question too. Is it suddenly is just gone? He's fine. Um, Back to the post. The second, actually, before that, let me switch over to this, which is about which is a post from Dragonmount from a guy who's very prominent there and posts a lot of theories on who is the third man, because this is from, I don't remember if it's a Min vision or from a dream, but there's this the third man from quite a while ago in the series. And there was always this, who the heck is this? And for a long time, people thought it was Lews Therin. Um, and no, it's, I think Lews Therin's the second man, and the third man is Morden, and he's seeing the visions anyway. But he does a good job of quoting from the books, and you can see from the description from A Crown of Swords when the streams cross. He puts in the passage, and as he says here, firstly, on the nausea, consider the initial descriptions RJ used to describe the formation of and first activation of the link. Quote, head ringing like a struck gong, Rand convulsed, Sidon and the void shattering. Everything was doubled in his eyes. The balconies, the chunks of stone lying about the floor. There seemed to be a pair of the other man overlapping one another, each clutching his head between his hands. And quote, just thinking of that, of the two streams touching, made his vision double again. Just for an instant, he could see the man's face again, sharp where everything else blurred. And the reason he cites this is he goes on to point out the different times where when the nausea and the sickness first starts. And he makes a good point that kind of what's happening here is a vertigo sensation
Mm-hmm.
where everything blurs, you get dizzy, the world starts to spin, and that makes you nauseous for anyone who's ever experienced that. And I thought it was a good point to go back to the origination and point out, RJ is very careful with his words, and he is describing here what he later describes in different ways when Rand gets sick. So I don't think you can say it's, no, it's definitive that this is when the sickness started. So the what really isn't in question. It's the how and the why.
Well, let's go
It
back to
makes
my
things weird.
idea of dissonance. So I was just looking it up while you were going through that on how cognitive dissonance can cause physical illness, symptoms, headache, blurred vision, physical digestive illness, throwing up, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sources NIH, sources Greater Behavioral Health, sources Cleveland Clinic. Uh, but now let's get to the Mount where he's up there and everything changed. We did this in another episode, and I don't think it was a Wheel of Time episode where I talked about what is the cure for cognitive dissonance.
Mm.
There's two things you could do. You can either okay, so let's define dissonance in case that was a different episode. Dissonance is where your actions do not follow your beliefs, right? So if I believe killing baby puppies is bad and I start killing baby puppies, I'm going to be psychologically distressed by that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the definition of dissonance, right? So Rand being actually a pretty decent dude, trying to be this hard steel thing that he was trying to become,
Mm-hmm.
that in and of itself is creating cognitive dissonance. But now let's go into a metaphysical level. He just put in his mind someone else who he very fundamentally is not like. And he has this voice in his head. He's going crazy. He's all these things. On the mountain, why did that get better? Because there's two ways to overcome cognitive dissonance. Let's go back to the puppies. I can either stop killing puppies, change behavior, right? Or change your cognition. I can convince myself killing puppies is good. And I have to do that to such a degree that it gets rid of that inner turmoil. He did both on the mountain.
Hmm.
He did both. He changed his cognition. He accepted who he was for the first time. Yeah, he would call himself the dragon and all that for the previous 12 books before that. But he finally accepted, I am Luz Theron Talamon. I am the dragon. I am the soul that becomes all of these things.
Earlier when he was doing it, this is a weird analogy, but so if you go back and watch early interviews of The Rock, and he was supposed to be a baby face, but the audience never accepted him because he was being pushed on the audience, and the audience would boo him. When he became The Rock is when he embraced that.
Mm-hmm.
He said, fine, I'll be the heel you want me to be. And that's basically what Rand was doing when he would flaunt the title of the dragon, is he was playing the heel,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
And by accepting himself as who he was finally able to separate what Moradin was in his consciousness.
mm, now
And
there's an interesting thought about why the sickness stops. Yeah.
yeah, because now he could say this thing is there and there's a connection formed. But it's probably because of what we did.
Mm-hmm.
He's not me. I am this person, the person I've been fighting this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And because he kept fighting that him, he had no defense for the other part. And once he accepted that, he not only changed his cognition, he accepted the fact of who he was, but he changed his behavior by saying, I'm not him. I am Randall Thor, who grew up with Tam Thor, whose mother is Carrie Thor. Technically, it's the
Mm-hmm.
Aiel lady, but I was raised by a member of the Two Rivers, which does not act like this. And that's and he changed his behavior. What the first thing he did was grow something. He was a farmer and a shepherd, right?
I was just about to say, and it's interesting that that's the first thing he does after this event, is something else that isn't really explicit in that passage, but I think is important, is that one of the things that drives him mad early on, especially, is the fact that the Dragon Reborn is the villain of the story in popular folklore.
Mm-hmm.
He is going to save us, but he is also going to destroy us, right? And something he kind of accepts is, look, I can't change other people's perceptions of what and who they think the dragon is. All I can do is be the best Rand al'Thor that I can be. And what's
Mm-hmm.
the first thing he does is he goes down and he grows a bunch of he performs a miracle, basically.
Mm-hmm.
He goes down and he performs a miracle of growing all these apples so that people will have food. And this farm, this orchard will be saved.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's his first act of, look, I can't control what they think the dragon is. And then you see this later when he actually goes into the White Tower, and the White Tower is freaking the hell out. Except for a few people like Swan and Brine, which is kind of cool. Um, they're all freaking the hell out, but he's, look, I'm me. You can freak out, you can be scared, you can hate me, but I'm me, and I'm here to do this thing that's important, and so I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But back to this post, because it's goes into what you were just talking about, which is the other reason I liked this nice little post here. Back to it, quote, the second answer I've heard is that the sickness is caused by the duality of Rand's soul as Lews Therin grows stronger in Rand's head. Because channeling comes from the soul, it partly makes sense that this split and duality of a person's mind could cause illness whilst channeling. It also makes sense that the dizziness would stop after Dragon Mount, which it does. The final answer I've heard is that it's caused by Rand forcing himself to act differently from his true self. What I mean is that Rand slowly becomes darker and darker up until Dragonmount, and the evil and cruelty he embraces at times causes him to become sick whilst channeling. A key example of this is that Rand becomes the most sick and dizzy when he's about to use the access key to destroy the Sanshin, which, as an aside, that was a good point that I hadn't really thought of and noticed at the time, is that what drives him to Dragonmount is how sick he gets when he's about to do something that's, what he did at Natron's Barrow was turning things up to 11. Well, this is turning things up to 111
Mm-hmm.
of what he's about to do in Ibu Dar. And it's not just how sick he gets, of how contrary that is to his true self, but then he's forced, back to your point about cognition, he's forced to see that he's the one who's wrong, that his perception of reality isn't actually reality, because what is the reaction of the people around him is they're concerned.
Mm-hmm.
People are coming to him of, hey, are you okay? Do you need help? It started when he was with the Tinkers. Is, wait, the Sanshin are evil, but here the Tinkers are, and they're accepted, and they're safe, and they're happy. And then it just kind of continues to escalate until he's forced to, as you put it, well, are you actually going to change your beliefs, or are you going to recognize that what you've been doing is wrong and it's not who you really are?
Mm-hmm.
All right, back to the post. Um, you could argue that this act of destruction and evil is so far from the light and goodness that the dragon should be, have causes him to become horrendously ill. Once Rand realigns himself with his true personality, the sickness stops. We do have a quote from RJ about the channeling sickness where he tells us the dizziness has nothing to do with the taint. And this is from an interview, October 21st, 2005, Knife of Dreams signing. Question: on my second trip up, I went for what I figured was the longer shot. I asked, quote, Rand has been having the dizzy spells and sick sensations when channeling, despite having cleansed Sidon. Is this a lasting effect of the taint, like having built up some taint in male channelers that won't go away? Jordan. And the answer was no, it's completely unrelated to the taint. Back to the post. This tells us pretty solidly that it's not his madness, which could suggest that it has nothing to do with the duality of Rand's soul split with Lews Therin. On the whole, I think the answer is split between everything I've said, and each factor plays a big or small role. Personally, I like the idea that Rand's sickness is caused by his actions drifting away from his true personality. If anyone else has some quotes from RJ and Sanderson or a better explanation, I would love to hear them. This question still bugs me. And I think it should bug you because I think this is another one of those Jordan likes the mystery. I mean, that's part of what makes fantasy fun
Mm-hmm.
and so endlessly entertaining, um, is the mystery of how does this work? Why is this world this way? Um, and I think that's a good synopsis of the different ideas, and especially the point from the uh from the signing question there, because going back to when this was going on, one of the big questions and debates running around the forums after Winter's Heart was, wait a minute, why is Rand still sick? Because
Mm-hmm.
a major train of thought was, even if the trigger was the crossing of the Balefire streams, a lot of people were thinking that because that Moradin's Balefire was the true power, that it essentially amplified the taint,
Mm.
was what a lot of people were thinking. And so it was pretty shocking, and also shocking for the answer, and also shocking that Jordan was so direct of, no, it's completely unrelated to the taint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is where I think that third soul entering, or the second soul, I should say, because Lews Therin is one soul with Rand. That second cognition entering the equation created such a, I mean, and add metaphysics to it, of course, created such an internal dissonant state that he was just physically ill every time that connection occurred. And when we look at everything that Jordan wrote in with the power, is when you use the power, every everything, every input is increased, right? You see colors more vibrantly.
Hmm.
You you smell better. You all of those things. So that connection, that wrongness in his head
Hmm.
would be amplified as well. And with spades, because balefire was involved, and probably a pretty hefty dose of it.
And something interesting I found in the interview database is when I was going down, um, looking at the channeling sickness, looking for any questions and answers on it, I found that quote from Jordan from that Knife of Dreams signing. But then there's this interesting Gathering Storm signing from 2009, where the question is, it's pretty clear now that Morden and Rand are linked because of the Balefire incident. Since Rand used Sidon to create the Balefire and now he gets sick when channeling Sidon. Does that mean Morden gets sick when he tries to use the true power? Answer. You're assuming that Rand's channeling sickness comes from crossing the streams. That jumped out to me because, oh, that again, I said I don't know how long we're going to go here because after going down this rabbit hole, I have more questions than answers. But I think that lends credence to what that Reddit poster said of, I don't think there's a simple answer. I would add, I don't think there's a answer here, which
Hmm.
was kind of his conclusion of, I think it's a combination of all these factors of you can have a triggering event, but then other things are going to come in and compound that.
Yeah, and just with the whole madness in general thing, uh, I think that's what Jordan liked to do, and we talked about this, I think, in the last Wheel of Time episode, was it's actually great that we can all have different conclusions within a framework. And what I think he did is he did enough homework on what it is. I mean, because this would have been the hot topic for craziness at the time, is schizophrenia, to get it generally right and let you fill in all the blanks. Let me let's look at some of the misconceptions at the time that play into this. We talked about the cognitive parts of it, which he kind of mostly got right. But the one that he got wrong was something that everybody believed then, and that's the stigma of violence
Mm,
around around schizophrenics, because there were a few high profile cases, and they were pretty much all murder suicides. Now you look at Luce and Tolman, right? Murder suicide. You look at
mm,
Rand's fear of what he was going to do, murder suicide. You look at everybody's fear of what the madness is going to manifest itself as with these people who can channel is murder suicide. That's exactly the vibe he wanted to give you with all of these men who could channel, right? So when he started this, that was the perception at the time. But what we know now is they're actually schizos are actually less likely to harm others,
hmm.
but they are highly likely to harm themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 50% suicide rate. That's that's as high as it gets.
Which when I brought this up before in on a topic we're not allowed to talk about is, um, there are, I mean, you have to take it with a grain of salt because they weren't really busy keeping records then, but there are rough records from the concentration camps in the Holocaust, and that is a higher suicide rate than Jews in concentration camps during the
Hmm.
Holocaust.
And let's look at how it manifests with Brand. He didn't off himself, but you could tell in his mind if he wasn't destined to save the world, he would have, because he is absolutely, for the majority of when he found out about it till almost the end in the apples, he was obsessed with his own death.
Yes.
And the only reason he didn't off himself was because he knew he was going to die, and he was obsessed with it.
Mm. Well, speaking of compounding events, a couple of other interesting tidbits I found is, Um, and put this again in the category of more questions than answers because I don't know what to make a bit of it. But I find this very interesting because one of the things that made it difficult to find questions and answers on this topic specifically is one of the things that kept coming up and I hadn't thought about was Rand's earlier channeling sickness from the Eye of the World, which is the normal sickness you get that all channelers get the first time they touch, especially if they do it unguided. We learn this from Moiraine when she's guiding Egwene. But I found it interesting because if you think back to those events, a lot of those times the sickness he gets is very similar to the dizziness and nausea, especially after he calls down the lightning.
Mm-hmm.
Where but it's in a rainstorm and Matt just assumes he's caught a cold from being out in the rain, but he's very dizzy, it's nauseous. He's pulling. Remember, he's in the back of the cart and he's got the head scarf pulled down over his eyes because the sun's hurting his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So I found it very interesting that there was a similarity there, and again, I think there's that might add to this numerous variables compounding things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Go ahead.
Well, to continue on the framework is why I think he used this as the framework. A big argument at the time that this would be early mid 90s, and it kind of went on up until about the early 2010s, was maybe it's a good thing. Maybe these people actually see the world like it really is.
Hmm.
Maybe they have insight that we can benefit from. And I think there are people still today making that argument. The problem is it's not. But they may be getting more inputs, but it's not. But let's connect that to Randland. So what's the insight that Rand has? And according to Cadsuane, most men that can channel is they basically can talk to their dead self,
Hmm.
right? So how does that connect to the taint? Who's the father of the grave? The taint may be the open connection to get that extra perception that nobody else gets, which is your own damn soul and the previous life it embodied or previous lives that it embodied. We don't
Mhm.
know. So that actually might be where it manifests. Yeah. Okay. So I'm able to take in more. My brain has to make sense of it. I'm making delusions. I'm hearing voices. And oh yeah, I have access to this thing through this channel because of this taint. And the taint may be the gateway to the soul, which allows that voice to actually be a real thing. And so, is it a good thing? It actually worked out for Rand because without Lews Therin's voice, he would have been dead by book 3 or book 4.
Mhm.
So,
Speaking of book three, that was another interesting tidbit I found that I hadn't thought of before. Is a Q&A with Sanderson, and someone asked the question of why at the beginning of not just the beginning, but throughout the Dragon Reborn, why does Rand seem more mad than he did in the Great Hunt, where he kind of, when you end it, he'd kind of accepted that he is the Dragon Reborn. Not kind of, he did accept. That's why it was all proclaimed and everything. Is and Sanderson made the point that I hadn't thought of. I brought up the lightning before on purpose because he was wrong, but he was right that one of the things Rand is dealing with at the beginning of the Dragon Reborn, it's the first time he's killed someone. And I got to thinking about it. I was like, well, no, it's not, but he doesn't know that because he thought the lightning strike was just fortuitous.
hmm,
And so he didn't have to deal with the trauma of the shepherd boy just killed a bunch of people.
mm-hmm,
And prior to that, anytime he had fought, it had been against Shadow Spawn. Well, what happens at the end uh of the Great Hunt? It is a very personal killing.
mm-hmm.
Is he kills
Against a person who
Turok
was not evil.
one on one
Yeah.
against someone who's just, you know what? He
Doing his job.
he's just doing his job.
Yeah.
He may be wrong, he may be technically my enemy, but he's just a guy.
Well, remember what I said back when I said of thinking differently than everybody else? It's culturally dependent. So someone in that culture, this disease would manifest completely different. It would be the person who defied all royalty.
Yeah.
It would
Yeah.
be
And
someone
oh
wants.
yeah, as Sanderson also points out, he's also suffered severe physical trauma because he's got that wound on his side that won't heal. Remember,
Yeah,
it
I guess the
cracks.
correct term would be suffering.
Yeah,
Suffering
remember it
physical trauma.
cracks open and starts bleeding when he accidentally causes that earthquake because he's trying to channel. He strains himself and he cracks open that wound and starts bleeding again. So he's in both significant physical pain and back to your point about obsessing over his death. And what does he say when Moraine goes to heal that wound that's busted open? Is his blood on the rocks of Shalgol? This is what's going to kill me, isn't it?
Hmm.
And so that's compounding the mental anguish. And then what does he do? He runs off on his own like a lunatic. But in his mind, no, there's nothing crazy about this. Of his whole driving point, one of the reasons I like the Dragon Reborn, not just that it's so well written, is I I I like the fact that Jordan made the main character a minor character in that book. We don't get a lot of Rand scenes, and a lot of the scenes we do get aren't from Rand's perspective. But when we do get him while he's off on his own running, is I'm going to prove one way or another, we're going to know for sure. I think I'm the Dragon Reborn. I think I really am. But one way or another, it's going to end at the end of this book, or so he thinks, because I'm either going to try and take Kalendor and be killed, and back to your point about obsessing with death, and then I don't have to suffer anymore, or I'm going to take it and I'm going to know for sure. And that's what's driving him. And that point is where you start to see Rand's downward spiral, but it is a very slow fall at first.
Hmm.
But I do think it's interesting, back to your point about cognition, of for Perrin, Mr. Logical Blacksmith, things are ordered and things are the way they are. Rand's nuts. What are you doing, Rand? This doesn't make any sense. But for Rand, it makes perfect sense.
Hmm.
But back to the channeling sickness in particular, um, I wonder how much of the stopping is, remember when Nynaeve tries to heal when she realizes she can heal the taint
Hmm.
madness, and she goes to look at Rand and says, "Holy crap! There are a zillion." She can't count how many tiny little black barbs are in his brain, but they're all surrounded by light.
Hmm.
And so that was something that was postulated on these threads of, is the light also somehow protecting him from whatever was causing the channeling sickness.
Well, we know the barbs are due to the taint. So if he has explicitly said that no, the taint has
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with it, then I don't think so.
Yeah, yeah. That is why that quote from Jordan made me really scratch my head, because I was thinking, but surely the taint is at least a contributing factor.
Well, the removal of the taint via the light may allow him to think clearly.
Mm. There was another interesting tidbit that I think also, back to more questions than answers, may perhaps say something about how the body swap happened. Because in that Dragon Mount thread that I brought up earlier, where he goes through the passage from A Crown of Swords and then goes through the different moments where you start to see the channeling sickness to pretty definitively show, look, this was the trigger. This is what happened, but I still think it's very open of how and why. Is he makes the point that it starts to get a little bit better as the connection between Rand and Morden goes stronger.
Mm.
And then he has a bunch of passages there of 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 showing that. But then down later in that forum thread, he does come back and say, "Yeah, I have to rethink at least part of this because he wrote all that before Towers of Midnight, where you see that the sickness is gone."
Hmm.
And at the time, I didn't go digging to see if he made an additional post anywhere. But for anyone who wants to go look, it's a very long thread. That's why I didn't go down it. It's a very long post, well written, but it's from Dragon Mount. So if you look for Dragon Mount, and the title of the post is "Who is the Third Man? Rand and Moradin's Link." So if you want to read the whole post, and it's back from September of 2010, so um it was before Towers of Midnight and Memory of Light. So if you want to see any other if you want to see read the whole thread and then go down that rabbit hole, see if he came back and talked about that more. But I found all of this very strange and interesting. And I like, but I'm also frustrated by the idea that there is not a answer.
No, no, no. And we what I presented was from a very specific lens.
Hmm.
And my I postulate that he used that as a framework where a million different other things can come off of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean that was so much of Jordan's style in general is you look at and he talked about this early on when people would ask questions and start trying to draw direct links between things. And he was like, guys, no, it's just it's metaphor, it's illusion, it's mystery. It's just because there's some inspiration for Brigitte from I don't remember the name comes from Welsh folklore.
Hmm.
Um, so there's clearly inspiration there, but that doesn't mean that's who she is, and that doesn't mean that her story is going to follow that story.
Hmm.
It's just it's a framework. It's a you know it is a piece of a puzzle.
Well, without similar archetypes, we wouldn't be able to identify with the story. Everybody would be starting from scratch with every story. And so when you're talking about making an epic novel or epic world, you have to have something somebody can mentally grasp onto. And when it comes to mental illness, what I just described is the technical thing we all kind of knew going into it because we've watched enough murder mysteries and we've watched enough, sci-fi, and we've watched enough of everything that's to say, oh yeah, when I hear schizophrenic, I know this. You know, it's enough of a framework that okay, that makes sense to me, so that makes me think, okay, crazy. The madness is this crazy. If he made his own different madness completely, we would all been like, oh, I don't get it. That doesn't
Yeah,
make any sense.
yeah, you're gonna have to spend a lot of time drawing that out so that we can all clearly see the picture. This is something I meant to bring up when we were talking theology last time because I've recently started watching Jordan Peterson's lecture series. The title is "We Who Wrestle with God," which is his latest book. And I was watching uh, the lecture on Adam and Eve and the fall, and I found it interesting that it's like 30 minutes before he even gets to the scripture. And to me, this is where a lot of the people on the Christian conservative religious right who are criticizing Peterson are missing the point. Because, oh, he's a false prophet, as a lot of them say. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He's misleading you because it's a secular look on this. Guys, you're missing the point. We are in a post-Christian nation. Okay. He spends 20 to 30 minutes just talking about stories in general. Why? Because we have forgotten why stories matter.
Hmm.
Okay. There is a reason Aesop's fables exist and used to be told. There's a reason Grimm's fairy tales exist and used to be read to children because they teach you a tale, they teach you a lesson intuitively rather than a professorial lecture.
Hmm.
And even when you go back to the founders, they all understood, even if they didn't agree to the degree of the factual truth of these stories, they all agreed and understood that objectively these were truth.
Hmm.
They were telling you the passages from the Bible, you can argue, debate, disbelieve, whatever, but even those people like Frank, a lot of people think a lot of the founders were deists. Franklin was probably the only true deist, and even he wasn't what we would call a deist today. And as far as I know, Patrick Henry was the only open atheist. But even they would agree these are valuable and important because they say something true about humanity, human nature, the human condition. And we need to understand, we need to have this as a basis for a framework of a society, or else we are going to have anarchy and destruction and horror.
Well, I was speaking on more of a grounded carnal nature, that we have this fantastical world with metaphysic that doesn't exist here in our world, but it's also based around humans. So if
Mm,
you deviate too far from human, the whole story just becomes silly. You know,
mm,
we talked about mental anguish and madness and everything today, but on a more simple level, it would be like he wrote a fight scene where Rand was fighting Turok, and another assassin came in the other room, so his arm came off his body and went over and stabbed the assassin and came back and reattached to his army, a la a Lego movie or something. It would have made the whole thing just not right, because he has to stay within the realm of human with this other framework of souls and age lace and power and everything behind it. So yeah, and even Ogier and all of these things, he stayed in the realm of humanoid
mhm.
to make it not believable but identifiable as you read it.
And notice when he doesn't, he's 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 playing the Jaws theme and not showing you the shark.
Hmm.
Like when we first encounter the blight and we get hints of some of these other really weird, bizarre, creepy shadow spawn things that live in the blight, he doesn't really describe them. Like, what the hell is a worm? I don't know. I think in the short story about Demandred, I think we find out in more detail. But for Jordan, when he talks about the horrors of the blight, he's not very descriptive because he wants figs and mice.
Hmm.
And,
But
and
even
I
talking
think to
about the blight itself,
yeah,
yeah, it's something that it would be really hard to exist in nature without the metaphysics. But we all have a human understanding of disgusting corruption.
mm,
And he described it in that way, where these things were, yeah, they wouldn't grow like that because we garden, that the plant would just die.
mhm,
But because of the metaphysics, this corruption ideal that we can all understand is still there, and we can still identify and keep on reading.
yeah. All right, well, that's all I've got for
That's all I've
this.
got.
I don't know that I hopefully I offered something worthwhile. I always feel like I don't if I don't have a conclusion. Um,
But we
you
just
know,
talked about that. There's
yeah.
many conclusions within the same.
Yeah, I love it, but I hate it at the same time of this is hurting my brain. Um,
Well, there's also a comment section. So if you have a different idea of where the sickness comes from,
mhm.
there's your platform.
Yeah. To me, the more interesting part of it, and I was kind of surprised I didn't find more on this, was the fact that it's gone. You know, we talked a good bit about, and I think we did have some insights into the why and the how of the sickness. But the more interesting part to me that I have less of an answer on and could find less of an answer on is why is it gone? You know, and I think the closest we get is, well, he is a whole man now. He is whole within his own mind.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Which plays along with the literature that I brought up.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
here we go.
All right. Well, then we will see y'all next time where we will, I don't know that we will get it posted before, but it occurred to me that, oh, it's NFL playoffs and we've got to pull up the brackets and give our predictions of how we think it's going to go before the games actually start on Saturday.
And plan
Um,
food.
and plan what foods we will have for the Super Bowl party based on who we think is going to get there. Um, so
Well, I've
that
already
is
got
always
one.
important.
The biggest long shot in the playoffs is the Denver Broncos. And so I'm going to test fate. And I
Oh,
put on the board Rocky Mountain oysters. If I can find them. That is the other question because I don't live in Oklahoma or those areas. But Rocky Mountain oysters, and if they somehow are the 0.53% chance they're to get there, I will do it. At least one. At least one.
I could probably get you some, but I don't want to.
We will have a secondary one for the masses, but I am going to. It is officially written on the board in dry erase marker, so it can't be erased. But it is. People have seen it already. Uh,
Oh boy.
testing
All right.
fate, testing fate, because if the Texans can't make it, I at least want some irony or something.
Um, the other thing I want to talk about a little bit is why I want to talk about that because I don't know if you've been on X lately, but it's awful. The oh boy, there's a lot of bad in the news right now,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easy to randify yourself if you dwell too much on that stuff because
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty icky.
Yeah.
Um, Specifically, I'm talking about the stuff that's being the revelations out of the UK
Yeah. I
over the
was
last
picking up
couple of
what you were throwing
weeks.
down. Yeah.
That's some bad stuff. And I knew it was bad, but holy crap, is it horrific. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about that, what's in the news, but more than what's in the news is we always want to talk about, okay, but why is this important and what do we do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know what? Take a break and watch some NFL playoffs or, you know, if you're Russian, it's hockey season now. So uh the NHL is going to uh you know, pick up your calculus book and try and relearn calculus and play the piano, whatever it is. Yeah, those things are important because otherwise you're going to randify yourself.
All right. See y'all later, everyone. Wait in this on a high note, Heath.